For thousands of years, the story of the Red Sea crossing has stood as one of the most dramatic moments in biblical history. According to the book of Exodus, an entire nation escaped slavery as the waters of the sea parted before them, only to close again moments later. To believers, it was a divine miracle. To skeptics, an impossibility. Yet in recent decades, scientists, historians, and geographers have begun to re-examine this ancient account, not to dismiss it, but to understand whether the event could have occurred through real, observable, natural processes. The traditional image of the Red Sea splitting in two towering walls of water has dominated art and film for generations. However, the Hebrew text itself uses a specific phrase to describe the location, Yam Suph, often translated as Red Sea, but more accurately meaning Sea of Reeds. This distinction has enormous implications. A sea of reeds suggests a shallow body of water, marshland or lagoon, very different from the deep waters most people imagine today. As scholars began mapping ancient waterways of the eastern Nile Delta, they discovered that thousands of years ago, the region looked nothing like it does now. What is today dry desert once contained interconnected lakes, canals, and marshes stretching from Egypt toward the Sinai and northwestern Arabia. These shallow bodies of water would have been heavily influenced by wind, tides, and seasonal weather patterns. Suddenly, the geography described in Exodus no longer seemed unrealistic. It seemed precise. In the late 20th century, oceanographers studying extreme wind events noticed a strange phenomenon called wind setdown. Under the right conditions, strong and sustained winds can push water away from a shallow basin, exposing the land beneath. This effect has been documented in lakes, coastal regions, and even seas. In some cases, winds as low as 60 miles per hour can temporarily uncover dry ground for several hours, long enough for people to cross. In 2010, a team of researchers led by oceanographer Carl Drews used advanced computer simulations to test whether wind setdown could explain the biblical account. By inputting ancient topography, wind direction, and water depth, they recreated conditions in which an east wind blowing overnight could push water aside, creating a temporary land bridge. When the wind stopped, the water rushed back rapidly, matching the sequence described in Exodus with remarkable accuracy. What made the simulation especially compelling was its alignment with the biblical details. The text states that a strong east wind blew all night, that the Israelites crossed on dry ground, and that the waters returned suddenly afterward. These are not vague descriptions. They read like eyewitness observations of a real physical event. The science did not contradict the story, it illuminated it. Geographic analysis also suggests that the crossing did not occur at the modern Red Sea, but farther north, near ancient lake systems such as Lake Timsah or the Bala Lakes. These regions were shallow, reed-filled, and perfectly suited for wind-driven water displacement. Importantly, they also sat along known ancient travel routes used by large groups migrating through the region. Critics often argue that even if wind setdown could expose land, it could not happen at the precise moment described. But history is filled with rare natural events occurring at pivotal times. Earthquakes, storms, floods, and eclipses have shaped civilizations. The key question is not whether such events are common, but whether they are possible. Science now says they are. This reframing of the Red Sea crossing does not remove the miraculous. It redefines it. Instead of imagining a violation of natural laws, we see a convergence of timing, geography, and weather so precise that it altered the course of history. For those who see divine purpose in natural processes, this explanation deepens the story rather than diminishing it. As researchers continue uncovering the ancient landscape of the Exodus route, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The Red Sea crossing is no longer just a matter of faith versus science. It sits at the intersection of both. And what scientists are discovering suggests that the biblical account may preserve one of the earliest recorded descriptions of a rare but very real natural phenomenon. To understand how such a crossing could have happened, researchers turned their attention to ancient maps, satellite imagery, and sediment data from northeastern Egypt. What emerged was a picture of a landscape shaped by water, not sand. During the Late Bronze Age, the Nile Delta extended farther east, feeding a network of lakes and marshes that no longer exist today. These shallow basins formed natural choke points, places where large groups could cross if conditions aligned. One of the most studied locations is the region once occupied by the Bala Lakes. These lakes were long, narrow and shallow, bordered by reeds and mudflats. Geological cores taken from the area reveal layers of sediment consistent with repeated flooding and drying cycles. This is exactly the kind of environment where wind set-down is most effective. A strong wind blowing along the length of the basin could push water away, exposing the lakebed beneath. Computer simulations showed that when an east or southeast wind blows steadily for several hours, water piles up at one end of the basin while the opposite end dries out. In some models, a land bridge several kilometers wide appears, remaining exposed long enough for thousands of people to cross. Importantly, this land is not muddy but compacted by water pressure, making it firm enough to walk on, matching the biblical description of dry ground. The direction of the wind is another striking detail. The Book of Exodus specifies that the wind came from the east. In the geography of the Nile Delta, an east wind would push water away from Egypt and toward the open basins to the west. This would create a natural escape corridor leading away from Egyptian-controlled territory. The text does not describe a random wind. It describes the one direction that would make escape possible. Timing also plays a crucial role. Wind set-down events do not happen instantly. They build gradually, reaching a peak before collapsing suddenly. This explains why the Israelites could cross safely. Yet the pursuing Egyptian chariots were caught when the waters returned. Chariots require firm, stable ground. As the wind weakened and water rushed back, the same lakebed that allowed passage would become deadly within minutes. Some skeptics question whether such an event could be remembered so vividly. But extreme natural events leave deep impressions on those who witness them. Survivors of tsunamis, hurricanes and floods often recall precise details decades later. In oral cultures, such experiences are preserved with remarkable accuracy. The Red Sea crossing may represent the memory of an extraordinary event passed down long before it was written. Archaeological evidence also supports large-scale movement through this region. Ancient caravan routes, military roads and migration paths all converge near the former lake systems. Egyptian records confirm heavy border control along certain routes, forcing escaping groups to seek alternative paths through wetlands and marginal lands. Ironically, these less patrolled regions would later become the stage for the crossing described in Exodus. Egyptian texts from the New Kingdom period mention chaotic natural events, storms, darkness, flooding, that disrupted normal life. While these records are not explicit about the Exodus, they demonstrate that the Egyptians were keen observers of environmental catastrophes. The absence of a direct Egyptian account of the crossing is not surprising. Ancient empires rarely documented their defeats, especially ones that humiliated royal authority. What emerges from this growing body of research is not a simple debunking or blind confirmation. Instead, it is a convergence. Geography, physics, climate science, and ancient texts all point toward a rare but plausible scenario. The Red Sea crossing begins to look less like myth and more like a historical event shaped by forces larger than human control. By reconstructing the ancient landscape and understanding how nature behaves under extreme conditions, scientists are uncovering a version of the Exodus story that is both grounded and astonishing. The question is no longer whether such a crossing could happen, but whether the biblical account preserves one of humanity's earliest records of a scientifically explainable, life-altering event. As the final moments of the crossing unfolded, the physics of the event became its most devastating force. When the sustained east wind finally weakened, the water that had been pushed aside rushed back with incredible speed. Modern models show that this return flow would have been violent, chaotic, and unstoppable. For anyone still on the exposed lakebed, escape would have been impossible. The same natural mechanism that created a path to freedom became, moments later, a wall of destruction. According to the biblical account, the Egyptian chariots entered the passage once the Israelites had crossed. From a scientific perspective, this detail is critical. Chariots depended on speed, traction, and coordination. As water began seeping back into the basin, the ground would have softened almost instantly. Wheels would sink, horses would panic. The organized military force would dissolve into chaos. What began as pursuit would quickly turn into disaster. This sequence aligns with everything scientists understand about rapid water displacement. When wind set-down collapses, The return surge behaves like a localized flood. It does not rise slowly. It surges. The timing described in Exodus, escape followed by sudden destruction, matches this behavior with remarkable precision. The story reads less like myth and more like an ancient eyewitness account of a rare environmental catastrophe. For the Israelites, the psychological impact of such an event would have been overwhelming. They had escaped slavery, crossed a natural barrier thought to be impassable, and witnessed the collapse of the greatest military power of their time, all in a single night. Events like this shape identity. They become defining moments passed down through generations. This is how history becomes memory, and memory becomes scripture. Critically, this explanation does not strip the story of meaning. Instead, it reframes it. Throughout history, natural forces have played central roles in turning points of civilization. Floods, storms, and earthquakes have altered empires. The Red Sea crossing may represent one of the earliest recorded moments where human survival hinged on a perfectly timed convergence of nature and opportunity. When viewed through this lens, the Exodus account gains depth rather than losing it. The biblical text does not describe random chaos. It describes specific conditions, wind direction, timing, geography, that modern science now recognizes as meaningful details. These are not embellishments added centuries later. They are clues preserved within the narrative itself. The more researchers study the ancient landscape of Egypt and its vanished waterways, the clearer it becomes that the authors of Exodus understood their environment intimately. They recorded what they experienced using the language and worldview available to them. Science now provides the tools to translate that experience into modern terms without erasing its significance. What we are witnessing today is not a battle between belief and science, but a dialogue between them. Archaeology, physics, and climate science are not rewriting the Exodus. They are helping us understand how such a story could have been grounded in real events that reshaped an entire people. And this raises a powerful question. If the Red Sea crossing reflects a real, scientifically explainable event preserved in ancient memory, what other biblical stories might be rooted in forgotten landscapes, rare natural phenomena, and historical moments waiting to be rediscovered? If you want to continue exploring the real history behind the Bible through archaeology, science, and evidence, make sure to subscribe to the channel. New discoveries, ancient maps, and forgotten truths are uncovered here every week. The next chapter of this journey is already waiting beneath the sands of time.